You guys, I am so excited to bring you this guest. She is someone who I have followed and just really looked up to for years. And this is the one and only Christy Harrison. And chances are that you have heard the name before because she has been such a pioneer and just a leading voice in the anti-diet, eating disorder recovery, intuitive eating space. She has written Anti-Diet and The Wellness Trap. And I remember when I read Anti-Diet and it dives deep into the history of diet culture, it just made me feel less crazy. Like it made me feel less broken because it really shows you how deep this runs, how long ago this started, how infiltrated into our psyche and our subconscious mind this is and indoctrinated. And so it was such an eye-opener for me. And what I really love about Christy, and you're about to hear her story, and she's a journalist and she's a registered dietitian and she just has so many credentials. But what I love about Christy is that you know that everything she's talking about is not just opinion. It is rooted in fact. She has done her research. And in this episode, we're going to be diving into wellness culture. So you've heard me talk about diet culture, but wellness culture is like the new spin, the new flavor of the decade. And this is where we dive into supplements and root cause healing through different non-proven methods and approaches. And there's really been a pushback against the medical industry and traditional healthcare. And I get it. Like I get it. And I understand why people are feeling really turned off by it and they feel overlooked by it. And so we turn towards these alternative ways of healing ourselves. And that can be a rabbit hole in and of itself. So we're really going to talk about the interlap between diet culture and wellness culture and how they both sell the illusion of control. We're talking about the truth about root cause healing and why a lot of the root causes that are brought to you and told that you need to focus on are not actually the root cause and why it can keep you stuck. You're also going to learn why so many of us feel dismissed in conventional healthcare and how that makes us vulnerable to wellness misinformation. And then you're going to walk away knowing what real well-being looks like. And it's not another restrictive food rule or supplement stack. So this conversation, I will be honest, will most likely challenge a lot of what you've been told about health and help you move forward with something that is gentler, more evidence-based, and truly supportive to your whole self. So just a little bit more about Christy Harrison before we get into it. She is a journalist. She's a registered dietitian who writes the best-selling Substack newsletter called Rethinking Wellness. She's the author of The Wellness Trap and Anti-Diet, and she's also the co-author of the Emotional Eating, Chronic Dieting, Binge Eating, and Body Image Workbook. She is also the host of 2 podcasts, Rethinking Wellness and Food Psych, and her work has been featured in so much media. And what I love is that she is getting this work out there to so many people who need it. So without further ado, I'm going to play such an insightful and powerful conversation with Christy Harrison. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. If we were to really hone in on wellness culture, because your second book is called The Wellness Trap. And so can you, for our listeners, really define what wellness culture really is and some examples of like telltale signs of wellness culture?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess it helps maybe to back up and define diet culture first, because wellness culture and diet culture share this one sort of system of beliefs. And then wellness culture has its own separate tenets that it kind of adds on to. So I see diet culture as a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue, denigrates larger bodies and higher weight, and promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status, including social status, moral status, health status, all of the above. And then elevates some foods or demonizes other foods, right? Has this set of good and bad, or healthy and unhealthy, clean and unclean foods. There's this hierarchy of food, or this black and white sort of view of different kinds of foods. And it oppresses people who don't match these supposed, tenets, this picture of health that is held out by diet culture. So wellness culture and diet culture sort of have that in common, I think, way of relating to food and bodies. But then wellness culture has its own whole set of tenets as well, including this idea of, like we were just talking about, right? The sort of denigration of conventional medicine, and the idea that conventional medicine doesn't get to the root cause. It only treats the symptoms. It's a Band-Aid. Whereas the, functional or integrative or alternative approaches are really getting to the root cause. And so therefore those are better. That's, the attitude of wellness culture, I think. It's also lionizing treatments that are considered to be ancient or especially non-Western. It's like this sort of dichotomy between Western medicine and Eastern or traditional medicine that is oftentimes a false dichotomy, and oftentimes, doesn't really, like, there's a lot of things that are taken out of context or misinterpreted or culturally appropriated that aren't actually sort of, the traditional things that they're made out to be. But wellness culture can really lionize those things, right? And sort of, again, it's this denigration of anything seen as, Western medicine. Mm. And then there's a real ableism, I think, that's baked into it too. So the idea of the healthy body, the well body, the optimized body is a body that is, constantly striving to be optimal in every way. And so if there is a chronic illness or a disability or anything that's sort of preventing people from achieving this, really unrealistic ideal of what health is supposed to look like, then people are made to feel bad about themselves, blame themselves. There's a lot of self-blame encouraged in wellness culture where, if you have a chronic condition or you have a disability or anything that makes you not match that supposed picture of health, that it's your fault and that you're supposed to fix it. And then, you're sort of like left to your own devices to figure out how to do that. And it's like this whole rabbit hole that you're supposed to go down. And, I think from what you and I both experienced too, there's a sense of like agency in that. There's a sense of, okay, I'm actually taking charge of my health. I'm actually, I'm doing something that is good for me. And I'm like better than other people because I'm doing this, because wellness culture really sets up this hierarchy of bodies and also of like health pursuits, right? So if you're someone who isn't well, but you're pursuing wellness, then you're better, in wellness culture's eyes than someone who is unwell, but choosing not to pursue wellness for whatever reason, right? Or not able to. And so those are sort of the main issues that I see with wellness culture. The other huge piece of it that we're seeing a lot now, I think, with the rise of, anti-science views in public health, I will say, is the denigration of science and of, sort of, again, it's lumped in with like Western ways of knowing or sort of conventional approaches to health and medicine. But actually science and well-conducted science, well-conducted randomized controlled trials are really a great way of teasing apart what is a real treatment or a treatment that could be recommended to everyone or large swaths of the population or specific populations, to get like a way to get into what is actually going to be effective for which groups of people versus what might be something that seems effective for other reasons, right? Because maybe people are experiencing placebo or nocebo effects, or there's a natural history of disease where, things ebb and flow with a chronic illness over time. And someone happened to do a particular treatment just as the disease was at its worst. And so inevitably they were going to feel better and things were going to improve regardless of what treatment they did.
Mm.
You know,
I think what's really insidious with the dichotomy of wellness culture and conventional medicine is that there is some level of truth within both, right?
mm-hmm.
And I can understand why people who are really in that wellness culture trap is they're so focused and they understand that you have to get to the root cause, and there's a lot of sense to that. And I do also understand from the conventional medicine perspective that like there is a lot of band-aids and treating the symptoms instead of treating the cause. And so it's when there is truth within something that's taken to the extreme that it becomes even more amplified and easier to slip into. So kind of like, how do you reconcile with all of that?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because there are grains of truth. Like there are problems with conventional healthcare for sure. And I talk about that a lot in the book, you know, where people are feeling marginalized and disempowered and unheard in so many ways in conventional healthcare. And so, of course, it's natural to be attracted to alternatives. I think that's a very common reason people go for alternative medicine. And there are, you know, real mind-body practices, I think, that can be helpful and beneficial to people, right? Like, you know, there is some good evidence behind yoga for certain conditions, that for certain issues. There's good evidence behind meditation for certain issues. You know, there's definitely people can have psychological things going on that, you know, not to say that people's experiences are psychosomatic, but like psychological issues can certainly exacerbate health conditions that are going on. Health conditions can bring up a lot of anxiety and depression and things like that as well. And so, you know, addressing the mental health issues that come along with some physical health concerns is really important. And I think sometimes conventional healthcare can miss that, or, you know, downplay that, or sort of silo things a lot into, okay, well, you're dealing with your endocrine issues over here, and you're dealing with your connective tissue issues over here, and you're dealing with your digestive issues over here. And then your mental health has to be with this other type of provider. And like nobody's really talking to each other or coordinating care. And that's all problematic. And so I think, you know, it is appealing to go to wellness culture spaces where people are talking about like treating the whole person and giving a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding for what might be going on with someone in various aspects of their life. I think the problem with it is when non-evidence-based recommendations start getting thrown out there, and, you know, the denigration of conventional healthcare is so much that people aren't feeling capable or, you know, empowered to seek out care and seek out like accurate diagnoses there. And so they're going to these alternative practitioners or integrative or functional practitioners who are saying, well, actually the root cause is gluten and you need to cut out gluten. Oh, you cut out gluten and things are still going on. Well, let's look at other foods you can cut out, right? Let's keep doing more and more and more of the same thing. Let's keep adding more and more and more supplements, you know, and they're sometimes missing things that are incredibly serious or incredibly obvious, but, you know, not being diagnosed in the appropriate way by, you know, that conventional healthcare could actually do if you were to find a provider who was knowledgeable about the condition, right? I talked to people for the book who, you know, one person had a tumor that was missed and misdiagnosed by a naturopath or a functional, I forget if it was some sort of alternative integrative type practitioner who was pursuing, you know, these restrictive elimination diet type things, and totally missed that this person had a tumor that was actually palpable. You know, if they had done a physical exam the way conventional doctors are trained to do, at a certain point, the tumor was extremely palpable and could have been maybe noticed. You know, other people had eating disorders that were misdiagnosed, right? That were totally swept under the rug. One woman I talked to had was pregnant with twins, unbeknownst to her. She knew she was pregnant, but she didn't know she was having twins. And she was having like extreme nausea, like, you know, sort of to the level that she wasn't expecting to have in pregnancy. And she'd been pregnant before with singleton and never had that experience. And so she thought, you know, something else must be going on. And the chiropractor I was like, oh yeah, you have adrenal fatigue, you know, which is not a real thing, not a real
which diagnosis. I fell for.
And it sounds good, right? It's pseudoscience. So it sounds like science, has a sciencey flavor to it. And there's, you know, again, grains of truth where some people have very rare conditions that can cause adrenal dysfunction or adrenal insufficiency. That's, not very likely and is rare, but it certainly needs to be ruled out by conventional healthcare or, conventional blood work and interpretation and things like that. And people can be fatigued for a very, a number of different reasons that might have to do with not necessarily the adrenal glands, but the endocrine system or something that, is related. But we need to tease out the reasons why people are having these issues and not just sort of slap a label that is not an accurate label, not a real diagnosis on something that, may have a variety of other causes. In this woman's case, she was pregnant with twins. That's why her nausea and her fatigue were so extreme at the time. And, so I write about in the book, like the dubious diagnoses that crop up a lot in wellness culture, including, adrenal fatigue, chronic candida. There's all these diagnoses that, again, have these little grains of truth, but are not actually accurate and don't really describe what's going on, can miss a lot of differential diagnoses, as they call them in conventional healthcare, that would explain, different aspects of what people are experiencing. So I think that's one of the real dangers of falling down that rabbit hole, is missing the opportunity to get an accurate diagnosis, even though I know it is such a slog and can be so frustrating and so, unmotivating to feel like, okay, well, we ruled out all of these things. Like, what is it now? I'm going to have, more expensive tests and more invasive things done to me to try to figure out what I've actually got going on. And I think in some cases it can make all the difference, between someone getting the help and support they really need and someone kind of continuing to spin their wheels in alternative health spaces.
Yeah. And I think it's really tough because there are some people who start going towards alternative health, who start seeing an integrative or functional medicine practitioner, and they do feel like that was the solution for them. And they feel like they finally found the thing that they were missing. And so then you hear stories like that. And I would be really curious to know, like, what is your take on that? Do you think there are situations or circumstances where that could be the answer, that could be helpful?
Yeah, it's so tricky because I think there are a lot of reasons for that, right? Like I said before, there can be natural ebbs and flows of disease where something just so happened to come into someone's life at a time when the disease was getting better on its own. Some, if you have an acute condition, especially, that's going to heal over time. But even for chronic conditions, they have those cycles. And sometimes people will go into spontaneous remission. So that could be, a reason. There's also just the element of chance, right? So like, say someone I think I spoke to someone about this recently who had an iron deficiency that she didn't know about and was having a lot of fatigue and other symptoms as well that were kind of correlating with that. Maybe it was something else going on, but the fatigue was like really central. And she started seeing a, naturopath or functional provider who's, prescribed all these supplements. And, one of them happened to be, actually, you know what it was? It wasn't iron deficiency anemia. It was pernicious anemia, B12 deficiency. So they prescribed all of these supplements, including B12, just happened to be in the mix. And so that corrected the deficiency. And then all these other supplements, maybe had null effects or maybe had some negative effects in some cases. I think she had some increased digestive issues going on, but like the improvement in fatigue was so profound that she was like, well, this clearly helped me, right? This was like a solution that I needed. So, sometimes there can be things that just happen to address the issue that someone had without, necessarily knowing why or being part of any sort of real evidence-based plan, but just where it was sort of like just happened to capture whatever was going on for them. I think also we can't underestimate what's called the care effect, which is just like the effect of having someone listen to you, understand you, empathize with you, having a provider who says, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to figure this out, right? The sense of hope and the sense of empowerment that can come with that, and like feeling like you're finally going to get some answers when you've been, dismissed and shunted around between different doctors for who knows how long. that can be incredibly powerful as well. And so that can lead to some improvement, especially in conditions like pain. The placebo effects have a real effect. It's not just in your mind. It's like there's literally physiological effect that can happen on the body with our pain receptors and our sort of endogenous opiate system, I think it's called, where we can start to create pain relief for ourselves. Our bodies can start to create pain relief in different situations, and including under this care effect where people are feeling heard and understood and taken care of. Like that is a real balm for many people. And I think some people will have that experience and feel better and sort of never need care again, or follow up occasionally or whatever with the alternative provider. And, it feels like it solved the problem, right? And so they may have this idea in their mind that is actually what is real and got to the root cause and it was needed and everybody should do this, when, maybe there was something else going on in the relationship with a provider that was actually sort of the healing ingredient, right? And then other people I've talked to have experienced that for a while. And then it started to wear off when, the alternative provider couldn't figure out what was going on. And then they were doing more tests, especially you see this a lot in functional medicine, right? Where they'll do these sort of non-standard tests. They're doing like lab work that sometimes is covered by insurance and is through a regular lab, sometimes not. But even if they're going through the regular lab, they're like interpreting results in non-standard ways. And so they're like, well, your levels are not optimal. And so you need to be, your TSH level is like normal by the regular lab standards, but by our functional medicine standards, it's too high. And so you need to be on, natural thyroid or whatever. And so people will be put on all these different medications or supplement regimens and given a lot of additional testing. And then sometimes that can, that sort of care effect can wear off, where people are like, okay, this person's not helping me. And now they're just, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And they're giving me all these things that don't seem to be really helping. Right. And it can take sometimes years for people to start to question it and start to feel like, oh, actually, I'm just like digging myself deeper and deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole that isn't actually helping me, And I mean, in really sad cases I've known, like there are people who've died because they have taken medications and, done regimens. I'm thinking of people who've had what was termed chronic Lyme disease, and they were on, heavy duty antibiotics for a long time and ended up having infections that, that killed them. Like, so this is not like to say that's going to happen to everyone, but I think it can go to a very dark place. I think when people get so wedded to these alternative ideas of what might be going on, and they're not being served or haven't been served in conventional healthcare, and then they get sort of radicalized against conventional healthcare and, refuse to see a provider. And so they're like just in this world of, integrative and functional and naturopaths and all the stuff that they go down these paths. Sometimes there's no coming back from.
Yeah.
So I think it can be, I think, yes, in some cases, there is help and relief to be found there because there's a really kind and empathetic and helpful provider who just helps you get through whatever you're going through, regardless of what the treatment they're giving you is, if the treatment is, ineffective or not. But, sometimes the treatment can happen to be effective. And then sometimes it has nothing to do with the treatment itself, right? And everything to do with just sort of where the person is in their journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have so much empathy for anyone who's in that space where, for example, I really hurt my back 2 weeks ago and I did not know what was going on. And it got to a point where I could not breathe or laugh or cough without having this like stabbing pain in the back of my back. And I really delayed going to see anyone about it because I didn't know who to go see. I was like, do I go see a physio? Do I go see a chiropractor? Do I go see an osteopath? Do I go see my doctor? And I feel like no matter who I saw, they would make a case for why I needed to go see them and why they were right and their approach was right. And I ended up going to see a physio, and I felt that care effect of like, oh my God, someone's taking care of me. I have a diagnosis. Turns out I had slipped ribs. I have a diagnosis. Like, I feel so good. He gave me this one exercise to do. It did nothing. And finally, I ended up going to see a chiropractor. And even now, I've gone to see her 3 times. And I'm like, I don't actually know if what she's been doing is actually helping, or if I just feel so much better because of that care effect, because I feel like someone's working on me, someone's doing something, and then there's the placebo because I actually have been feeling so much better. But I don't know if it's what they're actually doing or if it is that care effect. And so it can be really hard when you're like, I don't know who to go see. I don't know who's going to help. And then the idea of someone who's going to take care of you as a whole person and look at you holistically feels so good.
Yeah, totally. And I've been there too, like not knowing who to see, feeling like, well, it could be this specialist or that specialist or no specialist, just a general practitioner or an alternative practitioner. And different people have different pitches, like you say, of why their philosophy is the best approach and why you should only see them. And yeah, who knows sometimes what's going on. You know, I think the different manipulations that go on in chiropractic, you know, maybe some of them, like they're not really evidence-based, I think, for most cases, but some things might happen to be effective for some situations. And it also just feels good to get massaged and get, you know, touched and like helped when your body is hurting. And sometimes those things, I mean, I've had similar things where it's like an acute injury and then it just starts to feel better after whatever the thing is that I'm doing. And so I attribute the benefit to that thing. But, you know, maybe it would have just healed over time with some rest and some, you know, just patience and time.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tease it apart. And I feel like for me, just thinking critically about science and learning to read scientific studies and learning to really understand like what is the evidence base for various things and what do people claim is the evidence base, you know, because there's a lot of, it's funny in like alternative and integrative kind of spaces and functional spaces, there's like both a lionization of science and sort of like our science is the best. And then also like science doesn't know the answers. And, you know, we have this sort of ancient wisdom or this process that's so far ahead of science that science hasn't caught up with it yet, right? There's this mixed messages about what science is and isn't for, or can and can't do. But I think that for me, like critically reading science has been a real grounding force in these moments where I start to like spin out and think about like, oh, could it have been this? Could it have been that? I have no idea. I'm thinking about like an example from my recent life, which is I'm currently pregnant and I went through IVF to have this pregnancy and also my first daughter. So we had embryos frozen and, you know, we're ready to try for a second one. And I thought it would be similarly easy as it was to get pregnant with my first daughter after we had the embryos, because we got pregnant on the first embryo with her. And, you know, it was not so easy. And I ended up having 3 failed embryo transfers, and the 4th was the one that stuck. And so after the 3 failed ones, especially, you know, the first 2, it's considered recurrent implantation failure after 2 or 3, or sometimes after 4. Like they're not really, there's no actual standard of that. So you see different numbers in the literature. But I was like, oh God, recurrent implantation failure. Like I'm one of the, you know, there's like a pretty low statistic and a low number of people, low percentage of people who have this. And it was recommended to me to do laser acupuncture. And I was just like, oh, come on, what is the mechanism behind this? This just seems so, and I did it in my first pregnancy and I got like my first embryo transfer and I got pregnant the first time around. Right. And I knew enough then, I was skeptical enough to be like, this is, you know, probably has nothing to do with this. But I just did it for like extra peace of mind. And this time around, I was like, I really want to know, like, is there anything behind this? And I went on this whole journey that I have written about, and my piece is about to come out as we discuss this. But, you know, basically it's not evidence-based, especially for the kind of embryo transfer that I had, but like in general, overall for IVF embryo transfers, it is not evidence-based, as I have found in reading systematic reviews and diving really deep into the literature. And so for me, like really getting to the bottom of that and really, you know, there was a lot of uncertainty in the process as I was going through that literature, and as I was like talking to different people and talking to my husband, who, my husband's very supportive and very like science minded himself, but also he was just like, yeah, but what's the harm? Like once we had like 2 or 3 failed ones, it's like, okay, but maybe just give it a try, because why not? And it's only, a couple $100 more, and just for peace of mind or whatever. And I was just like, no, I can't let this go. Like it's something in me just resisted it. And for me, like getting to the bottom of that science and feeling like, okay, I finally have an answer as to why this is not for me and this is not effective, was just really helpful at like putting to rest all of that and sort of trusting my doctor's recommendations, which like she never mentioned laser acupuncture, never recommended it. Her clinic does offer it. And so that's how I got recommended it. But like, she's not really about that. And just, so, I trusted her, trusted the evidence-based stuff that she was doing, and was just like, okay, I can put to rest this idea that that had anything to do with my getting pregnant the first time, or that it would have anything to do with these failed transfers.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question which might sound stupid, but I know that if I'm thinking it, then my listeners are thinking it too, which is when you're saying not evidence-based, can you really clarify, does that mean that they've done the research and found that there was no causation, or there's no research behind it? Like, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I guess it can mean all of those things, right? So sometimes people will make claims that something is, like in the case of the the laser acupuncture, right? There was a claim made by my clinic that like, clinical research shows that this is effective for improving implantation rates. So that was sort of an easier case to be like, okay, what's the study they're referencing? What does the other literature say? Like, what does that study say? Can I just get to the bottom of this? Sometimes there are claims made that are a little more vague, right? Where it's like, research shows that this is effective. And then you look into the research and it's like, well, there's never been any studies done, any randomized controlled trials done on this, which are the only type of trial that could possibly determine causation if they're conducted well. It's just, correlational evidence, right? So it's like, oh, in groups of people who eat this kind of food, they have lower rates of this disease. But like, there's so many confounding variables that can explain that association that have nothing to do with the food or, the supposed effect of the food on the outcome. So that often is the case, right? And so then you can say, well, it's not really evidence-based to claim that, even though there is some correlational evidence, some observational evidence that says in large populations, and we don't really know the reason why, but there seems to be a link between these two things, but it hasn't been really tested in individuals and sort of put to the test in randomized controlled trials. There are also, randomized controlled trials that are problematic and flawed and, not good evidence for all kinds of reasons, whether it's they're really tiny and conducted in people who, not a representative sample of the population, conducted by the company, the pharmaceutical company or the device maker or whatever it is, or someone who, the supplement maker, right? That often happens in alternative medicine type of studies, the maker of a certain supplement or of a certain diet or, a certain at-home health testing kit or whatever will be the sponsor of the research. And so that's not to say that like the research is totally garbage all the time, but generally speaking, it is a huge bias and a red flag. And so you need to have like other independent research that corroborates it. Like, with vaccines, for example, the initial trials were conducted by the pharmaceutical companies, but then we had like large trials in groups that were not financially invested in that research, and then in, large populations. And this is where like infectious disease is where population-based, observational research can be really helpful, because we can see like what's going on in a huge population when they're exposed to this medication, what side effects come up, what results, are there in terms of like infection rate, hospitalization rate, all of those things. That's where that kind of evidence can be useful. But when it comes to, things like when people eat a certain type of food or whatever, and they have lower rates of a certain disease, well, we can't say that because there's no like that input is so confounded by other things, right? People who eat more eggplant are probably going to also eat more of other kinds of vegetables and have a certain lifestyle that, go like, right. It's like there's so many confounding variables at play here. So, yeah. So, in many ways, evidence-based or not evidence-based can mean different things to different people. I think people will say, oh, this is evidence-based. And then you dig into what they're claiming the evidence is. And it's like, well, it's not really great evidence. So is this really based on solid evidence, or is this sort of an experimental thing, right? Is this like early stage research, preliminary research? Sometimes people cite research done in animals. You see that a lot in the functional medicine world or like the biohacking world.
Yeah.
And that is, animal research is rarely borne out in human studies. So animal research is a good jumping off point for other scientists, right? To say like, here's a proof of concept. Let's see if we can apply this to humans. Let's see if the same thing will be borne out in multiple studies in humans. Or is it safe at this dose in the animals? Okay, we can see that it's potentially safe also to administer to humans, versus if all the animals die, then like maybe let's not do that. But you can't use that research to say, like such and such in rats means that, humans need to go on a keto diet or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So I would be curious, for someone kind of who's listening to this and now has heard all of this, and I can understand why, if you've been deep in the wellness trap, that this could be a hard one to wrap your head around. And you might be pushing back or wanting to just get more curious and become more critical about what you're taking in and what you're trying. And for someone who has been burned by traditional healthcare and doesn't feel like they feel like they've been looked over, and they feel like they haven't been taken care of, and they also don't want to do something that's going to be more harmful in the functional or integrative health space, like, how do you recommend that you move forward in a way that really does take care of your well-being, that you are taking care of yourself, without falling for either extreme?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really empathize with anyone who's in that position. Also have been in that position myself. And I will say, like, what I have been saying in this episode might have sounded really radical to me or really off-putting to me like 15 years ago, when I was really in it myself with wellness culture. So I get that it's a process and people might not be into it right now or ready for it. But I think to the extent that I think about it as just opening up to looking at how like a wellness approach, an integrative or functional or alternative approach has let you down as well, right? Like has not offered or delivered what it promised, because we all have had those experiences in conventional healthcare, and some of us, many, many of them that have been really off-putting for that system. But I think the alternative and integrative and functional spaces hold out this promise that they're going to be different. They're going to get to the root cause and they're going to treat the whole person on all of this, that ultimately, in a lot of cases, is not borne out. And I think the further people go in that space, sometimes the clearer it becomes to see that, right? Like, how many years have you been at this? How many new sort of approaches or diagnoses or supplement regimens or diets have you been recommended that didn't work, and that, you had to like keep adding on more restrictive things or adding on more supplements and costing more out of pocket and all of this stuff. Not to say that conventional is perfect in that way either, because like I said, I've had to jump through so many hoops and, rule out so many things with sometimes expensive diagnostic tests to get the diagnoses that I have that are now, that I trust, and then I'm able to manage effectively with traditional healthcare. But I think just opening up to the possibility that this wellness approach may not be working for you as well as you had hoped, or as well as the providers and purveyors promise, right? Like, what's actually going on for you? What has been your actual response and situation? And do you feel like you're sort of getting driven deeper and deeper into this realm, into, dieting and disordered eating and orthorexic thinking and orthorexic attitudes about not just food, but maybe everything else that's going into your body. Have you been exposed to rhetoric about medication being bad? And are you feeling bad about taking medication, or like that you can't take medication because you have to fix it with food, right? Have you been exposed to anti-vaccine rhetoric? Have you been exposed to, messages that this is all your fault, or this is something that you have to personally heal, that your body is broken and wrong and that you're like in charge of fixing it? Is there sort of maybe you've gotten empathy for the symptoms and the things you're going through, but maybe there's not a lot of empathy for having a chronic condition in the first place, or being someone with a disability, right? And maybe those things are seen as like scourges to be fixed. And what if you could reframe it and think about those things in different ways? What if you could have some more acceptance for yourself with your chronic conditions, with your disabilities, and figure out ways to manage them that don't require you to completely upend your life and, live restrictedly, right? It's like the title of your podcast, like we want to live unrestricted. And, when you think about like the restrictions that are imposed in the name of holistic, quote unquote, holistic healing or getting to the root cause, sometimes those are just completely life stealing and not life enhancing. Like how much of your life have you given over to these restrictive behaviors and regimens that are actually taking away from your quality of life overall? Because I think another thing that I have come to realize and taken away from a lot of my research is that social determinants of health, things that have to do with like our social location and our experiences of privilege or discrimination, or access to care, access to just like stable housing and, all those kinds of things, stable jobs and economic security, that has so much more to do with well-being at the population level than anything we personally can do. And then genetics is also a huge component, and that has a major influence on people's health outcomes, and especially with various diseases. There's, a huge genetic element to diabetes, for example, to some autoimmune conditions. It's not something that you could necessarily control. And so for me, like giving up control and not feeling like I have to be in control, or that it's my fault and my responsibility to fix this, but that actually like I can find compassionate care and I can seek that out in the conventional system where it's more likely to be evidence-based, not always guaranteed, but, more likely. And I can like accept that I'm going to be managing and living with some of these conditions and navigating them, and also live in a way that is relatively unrestricted and live in a way that like supports my overall well-being, including my mental health and my social well-being. To me, I have found that that is more important, and that is sort of the approach that I want to take. Not everybody might, feel the same, and everybody sort of has to do their own weighing for themselves, I think, for what like really constitutes overall well-being. But I think especially for people who've been at this a while, where they're like doing all the things and it feels really hard and they're just continuing to restrict more and add more supplements and all of that, it just can feel sometimes like a real relief to think, oh, maybe I don't have to do all this. Maybe I can like let go of some of this and see how my body responds and see if I feel better. And if I start to like untangle from all this dieting stuff, especially, like, do I start to feel better? I've talked to many people with chronic illnesses where, the chronic condition didn't go away, but just the fact of letting go of the disordered eating behaviors and starting to open up and be less restricted in their eating was a huge benefit and made their symptoms so much better, and then sometimes that opens the door also for different approaches to things that could be really helpful, thinking about like, maybe I'm not going to see this practitioner anymore. Maybe I am going to try to go find, someone, a specialist or general practitioner who can really listen to me and really has empathy and really understands and, can get the care that I need. I talked to one person who thought that she had a bunch of, chronic conditions, chronic Lyme, adrenal fatigue, all of these things that were diagnosed in sort of alternative medicine spaces, and was on all these diets and supplements and things weren't getting better. and started to heal her disordered eating. And that made a huge difference. And then from that place was able to like come back a little bit into the fold of conventional medicine and get tested for something that ended up being a rare genetic condition that she had, and that explained all of these symptoms she'd been experiencing, like debilitating pain and chronic fatigue and, all of this stuff. And so like, it is possible in some cases to get the help that you really need when you can start to like let go a little bit from this wellness approach that can be so restrictive.
I think that's so important. And what I'm really hearing and what you're saying is like, if what you're doing right now and this like perpetual search for the thing that's going to fix you, that's going to remove your pain, that's going to get to the root, is actually making your life worse. Like it's affecting your mental health, it's affecting your physical health, and it's causing a lot of stress for you. That's when you can start exploring. Like, let's say you're drinking a ginger juice every day and it's really making you feel good and you love it so much and it's improving your mental health and you feel like, oh my God, this is not harming me. Continue to do it. But when it's starting to get to a point where you can really ask yourself, like, is this just stressing me out more? Like, I was chronically bloated and my body was hurting all the time because I was over exercising and under eating and so stressed about everything that I was putting into my body. And I love what you said of like, when I stopped eating in a disordered way, I look at my life now and I don't have any stress around food. And I feel the healthiest that I've ever been because there isn't any of this search for the thing that's going to make these symptoms that don't even exist go away.
Same. Yeah, that's really powerful. And I feel that too. Like I was so just in such pain, so much digestive discomfort, so fatigued, all of the things, just bloating constantly. And yeah, giving up the disordered eating has cleared up almost all of that. I still occasionally have flare-ups of IBS when I'm stressed, when I'm out of my routine, if I'm like getting up at 3 a.m. to catch a plane or something like that. All of those things can have a transient effect. And especially like in times of great stress, my husband lost his job a couple of years ago, and that was like, my IBS really flared up. But I think just also being able to recognize those outside sources, like, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm eating. It's like this stress is affecting my body. There's this real mind-body connection here. And if I can address those things in whatever way I can, I can't fix my husband not having a job temporarily, but I can try to, do some self-care and some, meditation and things that are going to help me, like coping skills that are going to help me feel more grounded with this. Or, if I'm just really tired because I've had this, a trip or whatever that put me out of my routine, let me get some extra sleep and that's going to help, just kind of knowing other ways to take care of yourself and thinking in a way that's more truly holistic, actually. About
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, in a way, that's actually treating the root cause right there.
Right. I know. And I think sometimes people get so caught up in, and I did too, in thinking that the root cause has to be food or has to be some nutritional thing, that we're missing all of these other things that might be the true root cause that are much more easily fixed, perhaps, or just, have nothing to do with food and nutrition. And so we don't need these restrictive diets that we're put on.
Yeah. Oh, well, Christy, thank you so much. I could have asked you a million more questions, but I really respect your time. And I'm sure that everyone is going to be able to, if there's one thing that they can take away, it's just to be more critical and to really tune inwards to like, how is this pursuit of wellness making me feel? How is this impacting my life? And what would you say is like some final words of wisdom or things that my listeners can take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on it, is like, thinking about how things are impacting your life as a whole, right? I talk about the difference between wellness and well-being. Wellness is this sort of like constant drive to optimize and to meet this supposed picture of health that that most of us can't attain. But well-being is something that I think is attainable no matter where you are, no matter what chronic conditions you're living with. Not that it's easy, but that it's something that can be prioritized, can be worked towards, that is much more of a gentle approach, right? Thinking about your overall well-being. So thinking about your mental health, your social well-being, your economic well-being, right? If you're pouring all this money into these alternative treatments or whatever and not getting anything out of it, like, is that really helping your overall well-being, or is that money something that could be used towards, other aspects of life that would ultimately benefit you more? Physical health is part of it, but it's not the be all and end all. And I think if we can sometimes, I get too that when people are really struggling physically, it can feel like that's all that matters. That's all consuming. I just want relief. And I totally get that. And I think that sometimes the path to that is just releasing our grip a little bit, right? And addressing some of these other aspects of life that can sometimes get so subsumed by the physical health concerns that we end up having less room for overall well-being and overall self-care. And, I think I really like Pooja Lakshmi's concept of real self-care, that it's not about, spa days and wellness products and bubble baths and things like that, but it's actually like pursuing things that are in line with your values, help you feel better sort of at this truly holistic level, at this fundamental level, and that honor your own boundaries as well. So you don't have to, bend over backwards or completely upend your life for the pursuit of true well-being and real self-care, right? That those things can fit into your life as it is now and in a gentle way that feels doable and brings you more ease and more peace, even as you're still perhaps searching for a diagnosis or for answers for different health conditions. And that even if you're in that space, easing up on especially the food restrictions and the other nutritional dietary sort of interventions can have a huge impact and bring a lot of relief too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. And one thing that I think is just important for people to remind themselves of during this conversation as well is this is not a 30-second clip from someone who doesn't know what she's talking about, who's just throwing information out there. I find that I'm very data driven. I'm very show me the evidence. And this is coming from Christy, who has written 2 books and has put in so much research, so much integrity and rigorous, accumulation of data so that she can bring you something that is accurate and, like you said, evidence-based.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely have, really embraced the science-based nature of my work and the need for data for health and wellness approaches because of my own experience sort of out in the woods in the wilderness, not having that and not being able to think critically about those things. And it has brought me a lot of relief personally, and I think has helped me be more accurate and helpful to my listeners and readers and everything. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, I'm going to put all the links to Christy's books, Anti-Diet, The Wellness Trap, in the show notes. Please go out and read it. She has 2 podcasts, The Food Psych, and can you remind me the name of your second podcast?
Rethinking Wellness. So
Yes.
Rethinking Wellness is my second podcast. It's also a Substack if you prefer to read. I do a lot of things there around critical thinking about science behind various wellness trends and things that people might have heard about. I did a big deep dive on protein. I've done them on, different kinds of supplements for all kinds of conditions. And so if you have something that you're curious about or that your doctor or naturopath or whatever has recommended, I think it's helpful to check that out, maybe to cross-reference and see what the science actually says.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Christy. Thank you for everything that you do. Very much needed work right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.